everybody, and welcome to the 8th episode of Dissecting Liberty. This is the first one we've done that hasn't been an interview in a while, so hey everybody, it's just us.
Hey,
It's me, Cotton, and Liberty Zero.
Dissecting Liberty Zero.
That's right. So we're gonna catch up a little bit. There's been a lot of things that have happened since it was just a one-on-one thing. So, how's your Valentine's Day, man?
It was good. Yeah, I mean, I actually managed to not spend an outrageous amount of money, so that was cool.
It's always a plus. Yeah, I had a couple of drinks and I watched Requiem for a Dream and I live tweeted it. So that was my night. That was very entertaining.
Nice. I don't know if I've watched that movie.
Oh, don't. It's horrible.
Oh, okay.
The movie is complete and utter garbage.
Okay.
Noted. It was the absolute worst. It sucked because Jared Leto, I did not know this, but he's from Bossier City, Louisiana.
Oh.
So I'm like, all right, I'd seen him in other movies. I hated his Joker. He doesn't really have a big part in Fight Club. Man, he was good in Dallas Buyers Club. But Requiem for a Dream is horrible. That's a crap movie. I hate it. It was a waste of time, man. A complete and utter waste of time.
No, what's the plot line?
So, like, Jared Leto's character is addicted to drugs, and he has a friend who's one of the Wayans brothers, one of the guys that was in White Chicks, and then there's his girlfriend who's played by Jennifer Connelly, who is incredibly gorgeous. If she's listening, she can give me a call anytime. And like it's about just drug addiction and his mom that gets wrapped into it, and nothing really happens in the movie. I mean, it's crappy. It's not worth it, man. That's my review. 0 out of 5 stars. Definitely not worth it.
Okay.
and the soundtrack's really famous, but it's the same song throughout the entire movie. So it's really dumb. It was really crappy. But I live tweeted it, and people seem to have found that incredibly entertaining. So
Nice.
At least I got something out of it.
Yeah, and you also went to a Mises event.
Yeah, I went to a Mises event in New Orleans, which was February 15th, and that was really cool. So I don't know how many of y'all know, but Walter Block, who is I can't remember if it's him or Lou Rockwell, that's the founder of the Mises Institute. I think it's Walter Block.
No, it's Lou Rockwell founded it.
Oh, okay. Well,
I know he's the president. No, he's not the president. He's something else. Anyway, go ahead.
But Walter Block, yeah, right. You're right. Lou Rockwell, Murray Rothbard. Well, Walter Block's done a lot of writing with Hoppe, and he's a very influential guy. And he teaches at Loyola University in New Orleans. And so we have here in Louisiana, we have one of the premier Austrian economists just hiding out, and enjoying life. And he invited the Mises Institute, which he does every now and again, to come to Loyola. And Tom Woods, or those people weren't there, but Jeff Deist, I don't know what his official title is, but he's kind of the head of the Mises Institute currently.
He's the president.
Right. He's there, and I've met him in the past, and I was happy to know he actually remembered me. So that was nice. Um, I got to meet Lou Rockwell or Walter Block, and that was very cool. Um, and also the head of the Young Americans for Liberty (YAL) was there, and so that was interesting. I got to meet him. They're kind of like the the better Turning Point. They're more libertarian focused, and they don't shell out, as far as I can tell. Um, and then the I don't know the big speech at the end of the event was I don't think you could say he was the keynote speaker because he just showed up at the end, but the biggest speech was Judge Napolitano, and that was interesting. Um, he basically just talked bad about Trump the entire time, which seems to be his MO nowadays. He went from loving Trump to hating him. Um, but
I
that
think he
was
was.
interesting.
I think he was disappointed that he didn't get picked
Yeah,
as a Supreme Court justice, but I don't
yeah,
know.
I agree. That's most likely. He did some funny voices though. He did like his Trump voice and his Bernie Sanders voice and several other voices. That was interesting. I didn't know he was so good at impressions. Um, it was a great time. They had great food, red beans and rice, and crawfish etouffee. It was a
Dang.
great time. And then the people I went there with were great, and we had great discussions on the drive down and drive up. It was a great time. And then I learned that Walter Block does like these Friday seminars at Loyola regularly, like every other Friday. So I'm definitely going to check those out. That's awesome.
Sweet.
Yeah, it was a really good time. I wish they did that more.
Yeah, I get to go to the Ron Paul Symposium that is held annually down in Lake Jackson, and that's
Yeah,
always a good. That's always a good time.
yeah, I've never got to meet Ron Paul or even see him. I went to the Libertarian National Convention when it was in New Orleans, and at the Mises Caucus, he wasn't able to come, but he sent in a video. That's the closest I ever got to him. Dave Smith was also supposed to be there, but he couldn't come. That was a shame.
Yeah. No, yeah, yeah. The Ron Paul event is always a good time. This year they had Scott Horton
Yeah,
as he was the first speaker, and then Tom Woods did a live interview with Ron Paul, and
wow,
yeah, it was awesome.
that
I,
sounds.
I I got to take my fiance and introduce her to that whole that whole scene, so
Yeah,
that was pretty cool.
and she didn't run away.
She didn't. No, she
That's
was
good.
stuck actually. No, when we were driving, it was funny. We were driving down there. I think it was like at least 3 hours, maybe. And so, yeah. So anyway, on the drive down there, at some point, I started talking about foreign policy, and like I went on for at least an hour
Yeah,
just on foreign policy, and she was like she was polite and she listened, but yeah, she was pretty tired because we gotten up at like 5 in
yeah,
the morning to get down there, and yeah, so
yeah. I remember when I went to the caucus. I left from northern Louisiana, and then I got to Baton Rouge, and then I drove to New Orleans. And man, that's like a 4 hour drive maybe.
mm,
And then we walk in, and I didn't know what I was walking into. That was like my first foray into the movement. And when we walked in, Scott Horton was just getting on stage to do his talk. So that was the first speaker I saw, and I'm like instantly energized. I'm like, wow, who the hell is this guy? This guy's great.
Oh yeah.
It was like a quick B12 shot. It was awesome.
Oh yeah. No, I got to meet him. He's a great guy.
Yeah, yeah, he's cool.
Hopefully
Um,
we'll be able to interview him someday.
yeah, hopefully. Uh,
That'd be a great interview, and I do know that we wouldn't have to do a whole lot in terms of keeping the conversation going, because
yeah,
Scott Horton, he can go off on whatever he's talking about and keep going.
yeah. I think I mentioned it on the last podcast. I was whenever I hear him on Tom Woods, it's Tom's like, Scott, okay, I get it. We have to move on. And Scott's like, no, this is important. I gotta get this out. And blah, 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 blah.
Oh man. So in other news, we have a podcast Discord server now.
That's right. Now
So
I gotta warn everybody that only cool kids are allowed. Um, so if you're not a cool kid, then look elsewhere. That's all I gotta say.
yeah, we have it hopping. I think we have a total of 10 people in there.
Yeah.
But hey, for only having 10 people, it's pretty active. So
Yeah, and then don't leave out the Rothbot.
oh, Rothbot. Oh man. Once I figured out how to use it, like
Uh-huh.
that's just the greatest thing.
Me figuring out how to use it was a really bad idea. I think y'all should have confused me about it because now that I understand it, I'm going buck wild.
Oh boy. Yeah, I don't know like how much you saw of my attempts to get it working.
No, I didn't see any. That's when I was at the event.
Yeah. So Derek from the Burning Boots podcast, he actually, like, it's his creation. Uh and so yeah, he got in there and helped me out because I was struggling pretty bad.
Shout outs to the Burning Boot podcast. Burning
Yeah.
Boots. Yeah, they're great. I listened to their podcast with the Biting the Bullet guys. I think that's it.
Hmm.
Um, and man, that's a great podcast. That was hilarious.
Oh yeah, that was hilarious. That was
Yeah, it is Biting the Bullet.
yeah, they're gonna get canceled for sure.
Probably. So you
All right.
want to get into our topic?
Yeah, let's do it.
So we're going to be talking about education today. Uh, and I'll just toss it over to you because you've done a lot more preparation for it than I have.
Yeah, so we're gonna follow an outline that I got from John Taylor Gatto's book Dumbing Us Down, and the first thing that he does is he has this speech in there. It's the 7 lessons of a school teacher. Yeah, the 7 lessons school teacher, right? And so we'll go point by point, and I'll start us off, but then we'll go from there. So the first lesson that Gatto says that he teaches is confusion, right? He teaches his students confusion, and he explains that basically everything that the kids learn is out of context. It's random bits of information that don't really fit together. And one of the quotes that he has in here is that like every day the kids are experiencing a constant violation of natural order and sequence because they're not diving into one topic like with a passion. They're they're going from topic to topic. You get, however, like 50 minutes or whatever in a class, and then you go on to the next thing. And so that's the first thing that he talks about, is that he teaches them confusion. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, the first thing that came to mind was and this is a pervasive thing in education today, is that schools are organized particularly for young girls, and a young girl is able to navigate that kind of world a lot easier than a young boy. Because I mean, you think about you when you were young, or young boys in general. They get fixated on one thing. You know, and I
Yeah.
mean, can you imagine uh, anyone, like any successful business owner? You think of Bill Gates when he was getting started. Uh, I don't know if he flunked out or he dropped out of college, but I think he dropped out. And I mean, that was the best thing to ever happen to him in his life, because he didn't have to worry about, whatever it was, trigonometry or his art history class, or, whichever whichever subject that was holding him back. But I mean, bouncing from one class to another, having to sit still the entire time, there's no active learning, and then they expect you to listen critically at a young age to whatever it is. I mean, I remember when I took social studies in elementary school, there were several times when the teacher just damn near gave up, because I mean, it was just the way that the classes had to be organized was incredibly just useless to penetrate our minds, and particularly for us young boys, it was horrible.
Yeah. I was homeschooled growing up, but
Lucky bastard.
no, I mean, it was definitely a real advantage and an asset to me. But
Yeah.
yeah, at the same time, my day was pretty structured uh, in a way that mimicked a public school, in that I had classes that I had to do, and one after another.
Yeah.
But at the same time, with your point, like especially for boys, I think uh, you want to dive into that one area that really interests you, and I know exactly what you're talking about, because yeah, when I was a kid, I did a lot of reading, and my thing for several years was to read every book that they had in the library on World War II. And yeah,
Yeah.
as a kid, I mean, I was, if you wanted to know something about World War II, whether it was, battles, or weapons, or whatever it was, I was the guy to go to.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad was like that when he was a kid, but with the Civil War, he he dove deep into the Civil War, and I'm trying to think if I had a thing like that. I mean, I hated school. I hated until like I got some autonomy. Um, I never excelled in school, uh, and I was really browbeaten by the structure of it. Uh, I don't think I had a thing. I was really interested in military stuff, partly through my dad's influence. But man, I mean, I'm a case study on just how browbeaten you get. And then I got old enough to realize, I'm like, hey, learning is a lot of fun. I realized this at 17 or 18, when I was about to graduate high school. I'm like, learning is a lot of fun, but I want to read classic literature and study philosophy or whatever. I don't care about like the different names for different shapes of clouds. I couldn't care less. But you know, I had a class where I had to learn that. I don't remember any of it, so you can tell it did a lot of good. But I mean, like, but I had to spend time learning that crap, and that took away from time when I could do things that I actually had a genuine interest in.
Yeah. So I guess we'll move on to the second point, or the second lesson that uh, the school teacher teaches children, which is a class position. Um, so Gatto says that children are they're grouped together by what grades they get. I know this isn't, a rule, for every
Yeah,
school, but that is a system in some places. I know that they had that. I think they had that in Europe where I was. Um, they also obviously they group them together by age, and a lot of times, uh, that your seventh graders are gonna uh, look down on the sixth graders, and all that, right?
yeah,
Um, and then back on the when the children are grouped together by kind of what grades they're getting. Uh, One point that he made was that the higher classes look down on the lower classes, as the stupid class, and then when you're in the stupid class, you kind of feel like you can't get out of it, um, and it kind of breaks down your self-esteem and stuff like that. But he says that basically, if you're in a certain, kids have this idea that if you're in a certain class, that you're always going to be there, and that, oh yeah, sure, your teacher's going to, encourage you to do better, but you know, once you're grouped in with the kids that uh, aren't doing as well or whatever, then you just kind of get that idea that, oh well, this is who I am, and this is where I'll always be. So
yeah. In my school, we had that. We had a like an advanced math class, and then we had the regular math class, which was immediately seen by all the students as the lesser math class. Uh, and this was in middle school. And we definitely saw some of that. Like the people in the advanced math class would mess with us about being in the general math class where we were the advanced class was learning everything 1 year ahead. So by the last year of middle school, they were taking their first high school class,
hmm
and we were still taking middle school classes and doing algebra and whatnot, but they were already doing trigonometry.
yeah,
Uh,
and
Go ahead.
uh, yeah. So this isn't something that Gatto brings up, but um, yeah, like if you're in a class with 30 other people, and let's say you are one of the smarter kids, right? Uh, like it's almost a waste of your time in many
Yeah,
cases, because the teacher has to go at the pace of the back half of the class, and so you're just kind of stuck, and
yeah,
you're just kind of biding your time sometimes, depending on what it is. uh
yeah.
so
No, I still see some of that today. What I'm doing in college. I mean, man, it's different, but then there are a lot of things where you see it's not that different from like general education, like K through 12 education. But yeah, I mean, like so much of schooling today has like two assumptions that are plainly false. You know, one is that children develop at a steady, uniform rate, which is completely and utterly untrue.
hmm
And we know that. I mean, that's not a secret. That's not a great revelation. I mean, that's That's scientifically proven, and find me somebody that would disagree with that. I mean, that's just an obvious common truth. And then the other thing is that children are like a blank slate. Like everybody now, like the college degree is the new high school degree, right? Everybody
Hmm.
is seeing if they don't get a college degree, they're not going to amount to anything, blah, blah, blah. But there are a hell of a lot of people that just there's no reason for them to be in college. I mean, the amount of people that are in college today, maybe I will be overly generous and say that 25% of them probably should be in college. But there's this people look down on trades or not like starting a business, but you don't have an MBA. What are you talking about? Are you crazy? I mean, it's it's uh it's just a lot of time wasting and useless information that people aren't going to be using in their real lives. I mean, do you know the show Frasier?
No, I mean, I haven't really watched it, but yeah, I know which one you're talking about.
It's a great show. They had this is relevant, I promise. They have an episode where Frasier, the main character, who's a psychiatrist, his toilet breaks, and so they call a plumber, and his brother, who's his younger brother, who's there, who's also a psychiatrist, realizes that the plumber that's coming was his high school bully, and he's like, oh, you know, yes, he's a plumber. I achieved more than him, and so he's talking to him in the bathroom, and while the plumber's fixing the toilet, and he's trying to show off, and he's like, yeah, I just bought the new BMW. Whatever, I don't know BMW model numbers, but I bought the new BMW X20 and blah blah blah, and it's a great car. And then the plumber, his former bully, turns to him and says, "Yeah, I had the BMW X20, but I had to upgrade to the BMW X40 because it wasn't big enough for the kids." And that's true. That's why it's funny because I mean that's true. People look down on tradesmen, but I mean if you're an electrician or something, you are getting good money, or a
Hmm.
plumber for that matter. That for whatever reason, like I think trash collector is like the lowest of the totem pole, but a plumber isn't that far off. But plumbers make a ton of money. And then, you get older and you start your own plumbing business and you aren't plumbing anymore and you are making, 100,000 plus dollars a year, assuming it's successful. But
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of money to be made in trades, but there's just this derision towards them, seen as lesser. And I mean, that's not a good sign for a society. That, like this occupation that you can do that'll make a lot of money, but don't do it, because then you'll be lesser than somebody that has an arts degree and works as a waitress, and gets $15,000 a year. They're higher on the totem pole than you, a plumber that makes $90,000 a year. That's a real problem.
Hmm. And no, back to your point about like a lot of classes being just a waste of time. I mean, that was my experience, and that's, I mean, basically why I went and got my associates at a community college, and I was planning on transferring, but by the time that I was through with it, I had I was just kind of disgusted with
Yeah,
the whole system because like I always got good grades, but I had figured out the formula, um, and I could put in like minimal effort to get an A in each class, and
yeah,
by the time I was at the end, I was just kind of like, well, what's the point of this? Because I can
yeah,
study the night before, end up getting an A, and then I forget it, by
yeah.
the time the semester is over, right? So,
Well, I will say this. I will try to justify my own existence a bit here. Uh, like the path I'm taking, not necessarily. I'm majoring in two subjects, and not so much the latter one that I added later. That's more out of interest, but the initial one that I went to college for, it's a lot of hands-on work, and it's not like um, uh, what's something it's not like a job where the degree helps, but it's not mandatory. You know, my thing, the degree is mandatory.
Right.
And if it weren't for that, you know, I would not be in college. And don't think that I don't sometimes question it. You know, there's sometimes where I'm like, God, you know, I'm in this astronomy class and I don't give a damn. You know, I'll watch, you know, how the universe was made or whatever on the Discovery Channel, and that's cool, and that gets me all the information I want to know about the universe. But I don't want to sit here for 4 months and learn, you know, all this bull crap about astronomy. I don't care. And it's just a waste of time. Or, you know, a theater class. I had to take a theater class. And so many of these subjects, this is another thing that I've found, probably one of my biggest contentions about college is, you know, I signed up because it was a mandatory credit to get like an arts class. So I signed up for theater because I'm like, they have movie classes, but I really like movies and I know a lot about them. You know, so I want to take something that I don't know a lot about. And so that was not movies, it wasn't music or artwork or anything. I have a decent amount of knowledge in all those things, but I don't know a lot about theater. So I took the theater class. And man, that was the biggest crock of BS ever. It was the worst. First, I mean, my instructor, he wasn't a professor. He only had like his master's degree. Um, which is
Only.
fine. It's fine. I mean, but you know, I wouldn't have mentioned it if he wasn't horrible. Uh, and he was like a African immigrant, which is not bad in itself, if he weren't like a social justice person. You know,
Ah.
so he was talking about how it was like an invasion of white people in theater and blah blah blah. And his favorite movie, his favorite movie was Black Panther. And so many of these people in the class haven't seen a
What?
play. So many people in the class haven't seen like a live play, which I understand. I have before that point, and I recognized that I was lucky to. A lot of people haven't. I saw a Broadway play when I was younger, and I'm incredibly happy I had that experience. But a lot of people haven't seen theater, so understandably, what he did was he connected a lot of the things we were talking about to movies. And you would think in that situation, you know, you think a movie that everyone has seen, right? So you can pick like some of the most famous movies ever, you know, like the movies I love that are really famous that come to mind are like Shawshank Redemption or The Godfather or something like that. But no, he picked Black Panther and Get Out, two movies with like incredibly racial themes that play into his ideology. And I dreaded going to class. I hated it because I'm like, oh, what you know, ideological BS is he gonna try to rope me into this time? Uh, but then, you know, I take other classes like educational psychology, which you would think would be really cool and you would learn a lot of really interesting stuff. But no, in that class, I kept thinking, I'm like, oh, this is why the school system is so messed up. They're not teaching one interesting thing the entire class. Like they will say, make a good learning environment. And it's like, well, that's really easy to say that you want a good learning environment, but how do you make a good learning environment? They
How do
don't
you
get
do
into
it?
that. Yeah, they just get into make a good learning environment, you know, blah, blah, blah. And it's so much useless information that nobody needs. And then you take a class that would potentially have useful information, and it's nothing. It seems almost as if like universities are just like treading water, biding their time. They get your money for the class, but they don't want to put in the effort to actually teach you something that helps you learn about the world. I mean that's something I've come to terms with fairly recently, where it's really made me question some of the classes that I'll take in the future because I'm like, oh, you know, this sounds interesting, but you know, what room do they have to make it incredibly boring and not and just tread water? Uh, it's nonsense.
Yeah. Well, I guess
we'll go into the third lesson here.
Yeah, I've caught my breath.
No, it was all good, man. Yeah, so the third lesson we have here is the school teacher teaches indifference. And so what it says is that basically children are taught to not care too much about anything, but to make it appear like you do, right? So you show a little bit of interest or whatever in whatever subject you're being taught in that small space of time called a class. And then the other thing is that the teacher demands participation, but also demands that as soon as the bell rings, you have to drop what you're doing, even if it's interesting, and to move on and clear your brain and, get ready for the next, subject that's completely unrelated. And basically what he's trying to say is that really if you're learning, if you're trying to learn about a subject or a topic, or you're trying to learn a skill, that most of the time that's something that's worth spending some time doing, instead of just this 45-minute period or whatever. And that really you can't be splitting things up like that and expect kids to remain like plugged in and like actually interested in the different subjects or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then finally, it's just that he says that no work is worth finishing, and why care too deeply about anything?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember in middle school, I had this social studies professor, and I don't know if social studies is like what it's called around the country. Uh, so like or in other countries, because I don't know if I mentioned, but we have quite a few listeners outside of the U.S., so that's pretty cool. Um, but I don't. Social studies is like history and learning about civil society and government, and which is interesting because they always tie history in with government. Everything that happened throughout history is at the behest of our rulers. Um, but my social studies teacher I loved. He was incredibly energetic. I remember we were learning Louisiana history one time, and he was talking about how I don't know if this was the exact thing, but it was something very similar to like how the buildings were built by, the French, but the streets were built by the Spanish, or I guess it was the other way around. And he was jumping up and down in class, shaking the classroom because we were on the second floor of this rickety old building, and he was like, "Listen, that is incredibly cool. That is awesome." And then he went into explaining to us how that is a cool thing that you don't see elsewhere throughout the country. So we went from that class that got us incredibly energized and interested. We were there for an hour, and then the bell rang, and up we got to go learn about exponents now. And the teacher teaching us math was incredibly monotone, and blah 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 blah, and it was a jarring experience. And I don't know about my classmates, but what I ended up doing was just not caring about exponents and thinking about how cool it was that XYZ happened in New Orleans, and I just didn't care. And it made me really not care about, because I'd have an interest in class. Like I was always interested in my English classes because we would talk about cool stuff, particularly when we would like read literature, um, or just excerpts of stuff, and we talk about it and talk about what Shakespeare was doing in this play and all that. I thought that was really cool. And then I'd go to science class, and in theory, the stuff we'd be learning about was really interesting, but it wasn't how it was delivered. And I just think about Shakespeare the entire time. So, whatever cool class I had before the boring one just invaded my mind throughout the boring one. And it hampered a lot of attention that I could have been paying to something I was going to end up being tested on. And that was part of the reason why I didn't do too good in like K through 12 school. I did really poorly because it's not set up in a learning manner, you know.
Right. No, I mean, I had a similar experience. I mean, it was a little bit different because obviously I was learning at home, but yeah, there'd just be classes where you just kind of zone out and yeah.
Yeah, and then it's hard to imagine. Like you look at how the day is organized for someone in a public school system. On a good day, you'll get like 30 minutes for lunch and recess, right?
Mhm.
And then you're there for, I guess, 6 hours. I guess that's the normal time. Can you imagine as a kid, as an adult, it's different, but as a kid, can you imagine sitting there for 5.5 hours and being able to pay attention the entire time? I don't think, I mean, I think that the kids that can like should be in labs for us to study, because
Yeah.
that's not the 99% of other school children that are there. It's like a physical impossibility.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this earlier is that, how long has this basic model of like how a school day is supposed to go, how long has it been in effect? If the purpose was to actually teach, children and fill their heads with knowledge that they'll actually be able to retain and that they have a passion for, then you would think that like there would be a lot of change in between, the the, the beginning of public education in the United States. You'd think that
Yeah.
there'd be a lot of change because I mean, it's not as if people haven't learned about how kids learn, how to teach people things or how kids learn.
Yeah.
But still you're stuck with this status quo. And I mean, I definitely think that has a lot to do with, what we're going through here with these 7 lessons that the teacher um, teaches kids.
Yeah.
And it's not about actual learning and, being passionate about subjects and like how to learn for yourself. It's confusion, class position, indifference, and we're going to keep going with that. But yeah, it's just, one of the thoughts that I had.
Yeah, how much do you know about the Head Start program?
Nothing really.
All right. So the Head Start program was set up. I'm trying to find who set it up, or when it was set. Okay, I thought so. It was set up in Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society campaign. They don't give a date, but that gives you a approximate time. Okay, 1965. Um, and basically what it is it's like a preschool system, a state preschool system to help underadvantaged kids um, get a quote unquote head start in school so that when everybody reaches, like, I guess back then it was third grade to 12th grade in high school, everybody was on an even keel. Um, and so much of these things start off with good intentions like that. It was Lyndon B. Johnson, so I don't know how good the intentions were, but yeah, I mean, so much of these things do start like with the, oh, that's a nice idea, but they never see how it uh, pans out. Um, as far as I understand, the Head Start program is still going on. It says here on the Wikipedia page that it was reauthorized in 2007. Um, but I was reading about it recently, And other than some results, not exhaustive, but some results showing that it does help with increased literacy in underadvantaged children, and by that I mean poor, from poor families. There is no data showing that the Head Start program works. There's no data, but I mean from 1965 to now, uh, it's still going on.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean that's insane. That's 55 years, and there's no data showing that it works, but it's still going on. I mean that should be, and but then that's a problem with like public schooling in particular, but a lot of things like Social Security or universal basic health care is so many of the people that back these programs think about the idea more than they think about the results. The idea of having free education for every kid and a good education is a lovely idea, but it's a utopia. I mean,
Hmm.
you look at the public education system and it's a mess. It doesn't work at all. But I forget what made me think of Head Start, but uh, it's my point is, which is what I wanted to get to, is that it's been going on for 55 years, but there's absolutely no proof that it works.
Oh, yeah. It's like the TSA never catching a
Yeah,
terrorist,
but they'll
So
grope your grandma.
exactly. Once you have a government program in place, it's nigh impossible to get rid of it.
Yeah,
Well, I guess we'll get into the fourth lesson here, which is emotional dependency. And this is going to be pretty quick, but basically, uh, teachers can show uh, like they can manipulate a like a child's emotional health, or they can show a child whether they approve or disapprove with the various um, like having giving them a star or a red check on their test, or
yeah,
they'll smile at one kid, and then the kid who acts up a little bit, they'll give them a disapproving glare. um, but uh, the other thing is that the kids have to you have to curry favor in order to get like a hall pass or whatever.
yeah,
um, so it's one of those deals where you have to try, yeah, basically you have to curry favor with the authority figure in order to get a little bit of privacy or free time to you know go to the restroom or get water or whatever, right? And that's really what he's getting at with making children emotionally dependent on an authority figure.
yeah. That's totally unlike the Soviet system. Absolutely nothing like it. But yeah, I mean, in school, I was always the kid that cut up. I was kind of the class clown. Um, which now people that I know now think that's crazy. Because in like my everyday life, I have like resting bitch face, and I'm very serious and into what I'm doing. But when I was in K through 12 school, I was a cut up. So I never, or I saw very few. I'm not gonna say never, but I saw very few things like that. Because the teacher was always suspicious of what I was doing.
Right.
When I mean, if they had just if I'd been in a school that just did it the right way, I would have excelled. I would have cultivated my love of knowledge a lot sooner.
Yeah. I mean, I it's a little bit hard for me to relate on this one because of being homeschooled, but No, I see what you're saying with that.
When you
Oh,
were homeschooled, were you the class clown?
I was everything, man. I was I was the Chad.
Yeah.
uh, I was the comic, everything, yeah, I guess we'll go ahead and move into the fifth lesson here, which is intellectual dependency. And basically it teaches or the teacher um, wants to impress on the students that a good student waits to be told what to do, and the the teacher, or really whoever is employing the teacher, which is the state ultimately, decides on what few things that are actually taught out of the millions of things that are worth studying. And so basically you get this idea that a higher authority is what, or is who is deciding what is worth knowing.
Yeah.
And you become less intellectually curious, and you're looking for someone to point you in the right direction.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
people are trained to be dependent on that.
Yeah. I mean that makes me think of in school we had like clubs, and there was a robotics club. And there was, as you can imagine, there was a certain type of kid in the robotics club, like the kids that would almost certainly end up being engineers one day. Um, Kind of nerdy, and everybody was really skinny and everything. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but they were kind of ostracized by the greater schooling community, even though they probably had the most earning potential out of any of us. But I'm thinking, they really excelled at the robotics club, and like they were winning competitions and everything around the state. I'm thinking, can you imagine how much better they would have done if they didn't have to sit through whatever it was, whether that be social studies or science or even math? Because I would assume in math they were like, yeah, 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 just biding their time before they get to something they don't already know or something that doesn't come easy to them. Uh, can you just imagine how quickly they could have excelled if they were in classes that actually pertain to what they wanted to do in life? I think
Yeah,
about that often.
or even a step beyond that, if they had actually been able to maybe have an apprenticeship program,
Yeah,
and learn from people who are actually working in the field,
yeah,
um like just how much more they could have learned, just focusing on just
yeah,
that one thing for at least part of the week or whatever. And there's just so many better ways of you know encouraging kids to really dig into what they're passionate about.
yeah. Well, apprenticeship is a soapbox of mine, but we've been recording for a while, so I won't get too deep into it. But I mean, basically, excuse me, one of the core of my argument for apprenticeships is the apprenticeship is part of the system that advanced Western civilization to be so successful. I mean that's it's like almost a natural thing. Like I've talked about the natural order before, and you mentioned it earlier. Um, and you get rid of that, and with no good justification. It's back to what I mentioned earlier about the blank slate stuff. That nature is within our control, and it shouldn't be held up on a high pedestal. But no, it should be, because we are beholden to nature. It's not like our ability and action is not um, uh, does not end at oh, like our physical ability. You know, if whatever you do, you know, I mean, you're going somewhere on a trip, and it's not like, you know, hey, I want to pop over to the next town and do some shopping and eat somewhere. It's not that simple. You know, you have to take all sorts of stuff into consideration, like traffic, that's a part of nature, uh,
Hmm.
and the weather and blah blah blah. But man, I forgot where I was going with this. Oh, right. uh, Apprenticeships. Like, I mean, think about I'm they had apprenticeships in like Samaria, you know, the first human civilization. Uh,
Oh wow.
and then throughout history, you know, into industrialization, and then it's after industrialization when liberalism reigned king, and and rationalism reigned king, and man thought that the world was within his grasp, and there's nothing else barring them, or there's nothing barring them from changing nature, and you can call that the natural order, you can call that God, you can call that anything, um, but it's like a express um, disregard for the systems that have made us so successful today, and that have progressed uh, the human race to, you know, going from you know, no such thing as a combustion engine to having one of the most powerful pieces of technology ever envisioned in your pocket, you know, or even on your wrist. I mean,
Yeah.
I went on a couple rabbit trails there. I'm sorry.
No, I want to expand off of that because it's what you brought up was really interesting, and like the idea that children have to be separated from their families for a whole day, or just really from adults and real life and
Yeah,
business, like that, like that's a complete break from how, like you were saying, thousands of years of people existing and passing on knowledge, and now we have to separate um separate the children for nearly all day every day, and the only adults uh, that they interact with are these authority figures that they're so dependent upon pleasing, and have the power to kind of make or break their future. At least that's the perception.
yeah,
um Instead of being able to learn naturally just from being around people, whether that's from your peers or from your parents, or from the senior citizens that have a lot
yeah,
to have a lot of knowledge to impart. um it's just, why would you want to get away with that there's unless you have a different motive? And
yeah,
obviously, as anarchists, we have our own opinions on you know what the real purpose of public education is, right? And that's
yeah,
obviously to what we're talking about here, which is to create a dependent population and brainwash people to rely on the state and not be able to learn by themselves and to think critically.
yeah. Well, I don't know how much longer you wanted to go, but we've been recording for almost an hour.
Okay, well, we still got two more
Okay.
lessons, but we'll try to get through them quickly.
Yeah.
Um, so the sixth, good night. The sixth lesson is provisional self-esteem, and basically it's the idea that your self-respect should be dependent on expert opinion, and that comes in the form of a report card and what your teacher has to say about you, etc. And it's just that an expert should be telling you how much you're worth, and whether or not that person is an expert or not, I have my serious doubts.
Yeah.
But that's society has labeled them an expert because they have 4 years of 4 years of schooling in college.
One of my math teachers in school, her only degree was in art history.
Math teacher.
Yeah, exactly. And then my social studies teacher, who had a degree in history, he told us once that he had to teach math for 3 years. And he told, I mean, we're all like, I don't, like 10 years old, and he's like, I don't know the first thing about math. I was horrible at it in school, but I was told that's what I'm supposed to do, and that's what he did.
Yeah,
and like I'm gonna value that person's opinion, or whether you should value that person's opinion. Like if I were a parent and my son's math teacher was saying, oh, he's not blah 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 blah, and I'm like, what's your degree in? It's like, oh, it's pre-colonial, da 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 history, and it's like, oh, well, I don't care what you had to say about my child learning multiplication tables,
Yeah. Or I mean, one of my first professors, I took an algebra class, and the guy, he knew his stuff. Like he could, he was very good at math, and he could do whatever. But he was not a good teacher.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've talked about it, already, that a lot of what you learn in college is, it's a lot of times unrelated or completely useless. Even if you're taking educational, what were you talking about? Educational psychology.
Yeah.
It's, you think that you're going to be getting this, one thing in the class, but it ends up being completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
And, as you can have all the knowledge in the world, but it doesn't make you a good teacher. And someone who doesn't have a college degree may end up, being a better, teacher in a certain area. It's all very, it's just odd the way we think about these things.
Yeah, and then you think about in schools around America, they got rid of, this was a while ago too, they got rid of shop class, which was like one of the only classes that young boys would learn anything useful,
Right.
And then they got rid of home economics, which was likewise true for young girls. And I mean, because in home economics, you learn some really useful stuff whether you were a boy or a girl, and the same with shop. But then they got rid of like those vocational things, and they focused more time and money on whatever it was, some garbage class that was required by the state or the national government. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we'll get into the final lesson, and then I'll go back and list these off again, just so we can do that, so people will have them all together. But the last lesson that the teacher imparts is you can't hide. There's constant surveillance. There's no private spaces or private time during your school day. One thing that he mentioned was you had 300 seconds from the time the bell rang to the time that you had to be at your next class, and that basically kept your socialization with students, with other students, to like a minimum. which is funny considering everyone who objects to homeschooling always brings up socialization, right?
Yeah.
And another thing he brings up here is snitching by parents and students is encouraged. Whether that's telling about, or some kid informing the teacher of some other kid's supposed misdeeds or whatever, or a parent a PTA meeting, to talk about the parents, the kids,
Yeah.
And then homework, it follows kids home and takes up their time, and not only does it just take up their time, which is bad enough, but you think about the opportunity cost. You go home and you could actually maybe go learn something useful, but instead your time is taken up with this homework that from what I understand, at least from what I understand, it's not actually all that useful in in many ways.
It's just an extension of your class, and because I know the most homework I ever had was like in math, and so in math class, the teacher would quote unquote teach you the principles. I remember when I first learned exponents, she was teaching us exponents and how they work and what they mean and everything. And then, she would hand us out pieces of paper that would say, fourth to the or 4 to the fifth and 12 to the second and blah blah blah, and then you'd have to do all that when you went home, which now, is easy, especially with a calculator. But back then, I had my parents breathing down my neck not to use a calculator, and I didn't understand exponents at all. So that was easily like a lost 3 or 4 hours at night after being at school all day.
Yeah. I had almost like an opposite experience in that, I was never interested in the lecture being taught in most math classes. And so I just wait until I had to work on homework later, and I could usually figure it out by myself.
Yeah.
But the point being is that I would have been better off just working it out on my own with minimal help instead of
watching YouTube videos,
right, having someone giving a boring lecture and failing to explain it adequately. And
No, yeah, there are definitely some classes now that I'm like, I go to the lecture because you have to. I love the lecturers that don't take attendance. That's great. But then there's some that you have to go to, and you're like, all right, just kind of twirling your thumbs, waiting to get out. Then it's time to get out, and I rush out, and I come back and have personal time or whatever, and then it's like, okay, I'll get to reading, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is really interesting, and boy, I wish he said that during the lecture. That would have made a lot of sense, and but I mean that's kind of pervasive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess let's give our final thoughts on the topic, and then we'll close it up.
Yeah.
One thing, if you do a lot of reading of John Taylor Gatto or listening, is he emphasizes that he could that what he really did was he encouraged his students to learn and be able to learn on their own, and that he would help them learn anything, like literally anything. But really, the important point is that the key skill that people need to have is having the ability do your own research, to acquire skills and all that on your own, and not being dependent. And like, really, that's, if you want to talk about libertarianism and liberty, like that's how you like earn back, or that's how you gain back your freedom, is not being a dependent and being able to learn things on your own, at least in
Yeah.
my opinion. Yeah.
No, I remember in high school I got in trouble with my parents because I wasn't studying my coursework, and instead I was like watching videos about philosophers and reading articles about how to brew my own beer. Uh,
Nice.
which, I mean, it's easy, it's cool stuff to do, and I mean, I think that doing that kind of stuff, I learned a lot more than, like I said earlier, learning about different cloud formations. At least now I remember the basics about how to brew beer, or like I know the history of Friedrich Nietzsche. I don't remember anything about the different cloud formations and all that crap. Uh, but I mean, some of the greatest stuff I learned while I was in K through 12 school was stuff that I sought out on my own that had nothing to do with what they were teaching us. And that's most of what I actually remember from that period as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's the what you actually end up remembering, yeah, like you say, is the stuff that you have to look up on your own because you have an actual interest in it.
Yeah, well, I guess we ought to wrap it up. It's been a long and girthy one, man.
For sure.
All right, well, you can find me on Twitter at Cotton Archist.
And you can find me at Liberty Zero.
All right, thank you all for listening.